Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Today, I've got a special guest from Sport Dog Brands. It is Josh Miller. And Josh is a product training specialist for Sport Dog, but he's also the owner of Riverstone Kennels in Wisconsin. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate you having me on.
So we're going to do what we always do with a lot of our guests, because we are constantly introducing new people to the show and new retriever trainers, new hunters, new scientists. Just share with our audience a little bit about yourself, where your kennel is, and what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, so Riverstone Kennels, it's a kennel that I started now about 10 years ago. We're located in western Wisconsin. We breed British Labs. That's a big part of what we do. I spend a number of trips every year, not this year, but every other year overseas, spending time with people over there, bringing over the specific dogs that I'm wanting to incorporate into our breeding program here. And then on the training side, of course, we train the dogs we breed, but we don't just only train those dogs. We train dogs, from literally all over the country, all over the world. So we have dogs in the kennel right now as I speak from British Columbia, from, Colorado, California, Montana, Washington, Georgia, Texas, quite a few from Texas, from all over the place. And what's so cool for me about that is that I get to see dogs get used in such different applications from all over the country, So, a lot of the even just take a Labrador here in the Midwest likely does, a lot of, say, pheasant hunting, but then mix in, some waterfowl hunting where our dogs from, that come up from, say, Arkansas are usually mega duck hunters. Our Texas guys oftentimes do a lot of dove hunting. And so what's really fun to me about that is it's always kind of different challenges, different goals. And then, of course, our aspiration for every dog that we put through training is to get the most out of the dogs while we have them here. And I think one of the things that's so special to me about what it is that I do is the relationships that I'm able to build off of that. I can honestly say that some of my closest relationships and closest friendships I have today is because of these dogs. And, you think about it, that's a pretty powerful thing.
Absolutely. No, that's cool. The diversity and the training probably mixes it up for you as well. You're not necessarily just focused on waterfowl, but you do an upland and all, just various. I think that's an interesting aspect as a dog trainer. But, that kind of leads me to what made you decide you wanted to run a kennel and be a full-time dog trainer? I mean, it's not an easy job. I think, everyone knows that.
Yeah. It's a funny question because I don't know many people that it was like, well, I just woke up one day and was like, I'm going to be a dog trainer today. I also don't know many people that like from the time that they were little has like, this was like the goal and aspiration. It's really interesting to hear people's stories. And so my story started with a dog named Easton. So we back up to when I was growing up, like my, late middle school, early high school days. I was kind of the black sheep of my family as it went in the outdoors. My family being up here in Wisconsin, we're big deer hunters, so my dad, my grandpa, my uncle, my brothers, they all love deer hunting. And for whatever reason, like I just wanted to duck hunt. Like ducks they mesmerized me. I had, just was drawn to them. And my grandfather had a cabin up in northern Wisconsin. This cabin was on a lake. And across the road, he had an 80-acre chunk where they did all their deer hunting. And so when we would go up there on the weekends, my entire family would go out the back door and go out deer hunting. And I'd go at the front door and have my little skipper canoe. And, these, I remember I had like 4 or 5, like old beat up decoys, and I'd set them out. And, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just hopefully trying to kill a duck. And that was kind of my routine. Well, through that time, I wanted some companionship. And so I purchased my first retriever named Easton. And I did everything the wrong way as far as like how I preach you should be buying a puppy and finding your gun dog today is like exactly the opposite of how I did it back then. But again, I had no idea what I was doing. So I get this puppy And I work with this puppy. I read every book I can, watch every DVD, and it really became a passion of mine. That any little bit of free time that I had, I was working with Easton, and I had no idea the level that I had Easton trained at. And I met a gentleman in, if you guys remember, like Sportsman's Warehouse. I think they're starting to come back now. But up here, there was a little Sportsman's Warehouse across the river in Minnesota. And I just happened to be in the dog aisle looking at stuff. And a gentleman kind of approached me and asked me if I had a dog, kind of struck up a conversation. Well, that gentleman turned out to be the secretary of the Retriever Club that was local to where I was, and invited me out for a training day. And I remember going to that training day. I mean, I swear I was probably more anxious than I'd been for any football, basketball, baseball game that I had going on that year. It was like, that was like a big deal to me. So I get there and start running Easton. And again, I had no idea the level I had him at, but he's running with their master dogs, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, like, you have to be running this dog. You have to be, doing all this stuff. And so I did, and we were very successful. And that 100% had to do with Easton. He turned out in spite of me, not because of me. But that really kind of leapfrogged me into not only having a passion for this, but the connections that I had. So I was really, really fortunate to have a lot of great mentors that were professionals in the business. But that all stemmed from, we kind of, started this conversation with, the relationships that these dogs can give and create. Well, this was definitely that. I was able to network and get with some of what I consider some of the best trainers in the country, learn under them, really understand, their methods. There's stuff of theirs that I still use today. There's stuff that didn't fit me and my style, but I still learn from it. And it really kind of molded me to where I am. But it really all stems back to, that little Labrador, Easton, who was my best friend of 13 and a half years.
Yeah, that's a cool story. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have, very similar stories that kind of start out. I know mine was very similar in the way that you described it as, in spite of your lack of knowledge and training when you were younger, your dog still turned out. I had one very similar to that I had no, like I was 16 years old when I got my first lab, and I had no idea what I was doing. And fortunately the dog turns out, like you said, I wouldn't recommend that for most people, but it's always cool to hear people's stories and how they got into it. So how did you start getting involved with Sport Dog and the company? Because, as like the product training specialist, how did you just kind of step into that role, and how, and what exactly is that role with Sport Dog?
Yeah. Well, and so it's kind of evolved. I've kind of evolved and grown with this company. Sport Dog has been a great company for me. They've supported me kind of throughout my career. But it really all started with, so I was running a number of hunt tests and field trials, again, when I was younger, a lot with Easton, and I was being successful. And there just wasn't many people my age doing this. I think at the time I was probably, 19, somewhere in there. And, so there was actually a representation from Sport Dog at an event. He approached me and he said, hey, I'd love to get someone, of your age involved in what we have going on. And I had actually already been using Sport Dog products back then. Trying to think, it was the 1800, I think I was using, which was completely, different, machine than it is now. I mean, the technology has come so far, but I was already using it, so it made sense. And so I went and, became a part of the pro staff, and then it kind of evolved from there where, I started, doing some speaking engagements. I started kind of, spreading my knowledge, and, just kind of, went from there. And so now what I do, I kind of have gone through the gamut. I handled some sales accounts for them as I had some connections, with, some accounts, enjoyed that, but it was too time consuming to juggle the kennel and that. And so I managed the pro staff for a while, and I love every single person that was on that pro staff. but it did feel like it was a full-time babysitter role at times. Again, just became very time consuming. So I backed away from that, and now what I do for Sport Dog is, as a product training specialist, is really what I enjoy doing, which is sharing my knowledge, sharing my experiences to try to help people have a better experience with their dogs. And I think that this is so important because it doesn't matter what you're using, product wise, whether it's a leash, whether it's an e-collar, whether it's a check cord, whether it's you're just being vocal, whether it's a whistle, how you work with your dog in that tool really, it dictates the success or not, of that training session, or really as you kind of go through that dog's life, whether you consider that dog a success or not. And so I really enjoy that. I love that. I get to travel all over the country. Again, not this year, but most years, and speak on that. And so again, meet great people doing it. And it's something that I really enjoy.
Yeah. Well, let's go back real quick because you mentioned something. And I think this is kind of a cool jumping off point. You mentioned that the way that you got your dog is not the way that you would tell people when they're looking for a dog. What exactly do you tell people when someone calls you and said, "Hey, I want to get a dog," and what's your first steps in explaining this whole process to them?
Yeah, well, I'll try to give the abbreviated version because, as you're probably going to tell very quickly, I get extremely passionate about this, and so I can kind of ramble. So I'll try not to do that, but. So breeding to me, it's way more than just, hey, let's put two good dogs together and have puppies, right? And so where I really started seeing this stuff was, years ago. Like I said, I've had the kennel for over 10 years now, and I was seeing this even before I had the kennel, where we would have dogs in for training that the pedigree and the paper said that this dog should be great. Well, the dog was hard-mouthed. The dog was, whiny and vocal. The dog was, what have you. And I really started doing a lot of research, actually took classes and schooling on genetics and really what genetics are and what traits, are passed on, how they're passed on. And really took a deep dive into it. And so, things like, for me, I believe a mouth is genetic. That's one of the reasons I spend so much time overseas, because they put an emphasis on a very natural mouth. What I mean by a natural mouth is not chomping, not hard mouthed, not shaking, and that natural retrieve, which, a lot of these dogs have a natural retrieve. I mean, they want to have that good soft hold and bring it all the way to you just about every time naturally, where on paper here, one of the things that I kind of fought with was, you could have dogs that are very accomplished, very titled, and again, on paper look great, but you don't know what it took training wise to get that dog to that point. Right. Mm-hmm. So, there are a lot of very talented professional trainers out there that can get dogs to do very, very awesome things. But what was natural in that dog? Because that, as a puppy owner, as your average Joe that doesn't have the experience, doesn't have the knowledge, doesn't have the tools, you are going to inherit what is natural in that puppy. And so that's one of the reasons that, my stud dog specifically that I have, I keep all the boys. I get them as young dogs, build them up, and then I kind of decide whether they are going to stay here and be a part of my team, or if I'm going to find a forever home for them where they can go be a great dog, everything like that. And I've moved on from dogs that I absolutely adore because there's something just not quite there. And the proof is really in the pudding here as far as these puppies that we've been putting out. I mean, these dogs are so natural. They're so whining is one that I cannot stand in the duck blind. Mm-hmm. Why would anyone want to sit there for 8 minutes, let alone 8 hours, sitting there listening to a dog scream and whine in a duck blind? And that's where, again, on paper, we run hunt tests all year, and we pass the same that the dog next to us passes. They're screaming and but the dog's doing the work. Mm-hmm. Right. So on paper they look very, very similar, but for breeding purposes, I'm looking for extremely specific things. So that's one thing. Two is the health. So we do, I believe it's 17 genetic tests on every male and female that we breed. The reason it's that number is because that is the most tests that you can run on a Labrador Retriever. And what we're trying to do is we are just trying to produce the absolute healthiest puppies that we possibly can. Because there is no fun in, getting a puppy and, a year down the road, you're dealing with hip dysplasia issues. 2 years down the road, you have cataracts or whatever it is. I mean, there's so much out there. And so for me, I believe as a breeder, to do justice to the breed and to justice to my clients, I need to take it upon myself to do everything I can to make sure that these puppies are as healthy as they can. Now, there are always, anytime you deal with animals, there's always things that come up, but there's a lot that we can eliminate just by going through that. So, those are a couple things. Again, I could probably go on and on about this, but those are a few things that I really, really focus on. And then I think another piece of it too is sometimes people, like especially when they call in and talk with me, they get a little scared away because of our waiting list. So we have a waiting list of about 1.5 years. If you were to call us right now, it'd be about 1.5 years wait before I could get you a puppy. That's not because we're only having 2 litters a year. We have about 10 to 12 litters a year. I believe that's enough to be putting great puppies in people's hands, but it's not to the point that I'm losing quality control. I'm not producing puppies just to produce puppies. But I always tell people that if you're looking for a puppy, you need to do your research ahead of time and not be in that I want one right now mode. Because if you're out there looking for a puppy, you're calling people, you will find that a lot of reputable breeders, they will have a waiting list. And hopefully what that does is it tells you they're doing something right. If you're calling and you make a phone call and they're like, yeah, I have one, he's ready to go next week, there's likely a reason for that. And so, you are going into, God willing, a 15-year commitment, right? Rushing it just to get a puppy right now is not the best way to go into that relationship.
When I got my dog when I was 16, I showed up at a farmer's house and he gave him to him for free. So, I knew nothing about this. And, but, there are people out there who do that, but then there's also this other side that is very serious. And for someone who's looking to get a puppy, it's something to really look into and call around and call someone like you who has this knowledge and experience to really learn about what these different breeds and these natural trends that these dogs have. It's really cool. We could probably talk for 2 hours just about that. What are you doing with dogs at this time of year? I mean, what are you telling people? I'm sure that, people either coming to pick up their dog that's been going through training sessions or people are calling you like, hey, my dog's doing this. What exactly would you be working on right now or just reinforcing during the season?
Right. Well, first off, thank God that it's here because I have been waiting for this all season long. I'm a duck nut for those of you guys that know me. I waterfowl hunted 92 days last year. This is what I look forward to all year long. And so I'm stoked that it is here. But usually what we find right now is that there are 2 different types of people that are out there with their dogs. There's person A, who has been diligently working with their dog all summer long, that is getting to the point that, hey, we're finally to the point that we can go put this in action. Or person B that I'm going to call it, or it gets in, I'll call it oh shoot mode, where, oh shoot, I haven't been doing anything with my dog and I should probably try to do something really quick because season starts the next week. And so usually it's one of those 2 camps. And so, let's take person A, the one that has been, working with their dog all year long. That person, what we're trying to do now is we're really trying to hone in on situational training as it correlates with how you're going to be hunting, right? Because let's face it, if you've done all the work, your dog's crushing it, you're super happy, but all of your work up to this point has been in the backyard or down the street at the soccer fields, it doesn't mean this is just going to translate over into your hunting setups, right? And so I'm really big on preaching control what you can control. And what I mean by that is that if you take your dog into a waterfall situation, think about all the things you can't control. You can't control what the birds do. You can't control how they finish, if you see anything even. And like for me as a trainer, like the one thing that I cannot replicate is 30 mallards swinging around and then wanting to finish right in our face, right? Especially for a young dog, you think about if the wheels are going to come off, it's going to be right then, right? And there's just no way to train for that. So instead of worrying about that, we're going to control what we can control. What blind are you going to be hunting out of? Well, let's train specifically out of that blind. Does your dog wear a vest? Okay. Well, let's get him in the vest. Are you going to ride in a boat, or a side by side or whatever it is to and from your hunting places? Like, let's try to condition the dog to as much as he or she is going to see on opening day as possible, because if we control that stuff, now we've just minimized what we actually have to worry about, right? And we've prepared the dog the best we can, specifically for young dogs. You think about if all the training has been essentially yard work or pretty low distraction level areas in particular, and that dog has never seen a boat, and the first thing you're doing is 3:30 in the morning, headlamps are going, you throw the dog in the boat, he's going, what in the world is going on? Then you go and stick him in a blind he's never seen before, and you just expect that he's going to look out there and retrieve and crush this thing because he's been doing it with bumpers in the backyard all year. You are going to be sadly disappointed, more than likely, right? Because it's just unfair, so we need to really, again, control what we can control, prepare them for that, because it puts us in the best situation to succeed. So that's what we're doing with those, that camp.
That chaos that you're describing, I'm just going through my head, the boats and the headlamps and the blinds, getting in and out of weird, oddly shaped, blinds and doing that. And that's something that you can probably only recreate so much of that chaos to an extent, but it's something that, if the dog's not familiar with all of this situation, it's going to totally throw them off. I can see, that's a great tip for people to think about it as they work towards the season, I guess.
Right. Well, and if your dog isn't prepared for that stuff, that's on you, right? We can't expect that we just throw our dog in a boat that's never seen a boat before and he should just be fine with it, or throw him in a blind he's never seen before and he should just work out of it like he's done it 100 times. That's on us if we have not prepared the dog for that. And really, most of whether we perceive a hunt as successful or not is how the dog handles those things, right? So if we haven't done our job, our mindset and expectations have to change so that because I get it, like it is not always possible to do that stuff, right? So I travel a lot to hunt. So I'm hunting a lot of situations. I don't know how we're going to get to and from the blind. I don't know what kind of setup we're going to be in. So it's not always possible, but again, control what you can control. I think that's probably the best advice that I have for someone kind of in that situation. But then if we go over to, the oh shoot, camp, as we called it, that camp really, I just spoke about mindset and expectations. Your mindset and expectation really has to change, especially depending on where your dog is at. Now, if you have a finished dog that is a seasoned veteran, he's 5-6 years old, yeah, okay, you might have been able to get away with all year not doing anything, give him a few tune-ups and he could be ready to go, right? But if you have specifically a young dog, that has not been in this situation before, your mindset drastically has to change as far as what your expectations are going to be for this year. So, you may have to go from wanting a dog to be completely steady and doing really solid marks to, hey, maybe because I haven't done my job, I'm going to need to leave the gun at home, hold the dog by the collar, and just let the dog get this exposure. Because bad habits, as we all know, they're created way better or way quicker rather than good habits are. And so your expectations have to change, but let's try to pinpoint a few things and say, I'm going to focus on this. So for me, any kind of duck dog, steadiness is the utmost importance. I don't care if they can't do anything else. If they're going to be steady, they're going to be safe. And ultimately, that's the name of the game, right? Because I see way too often, especially on social media now, I see all these videos and stuff, right? I see way too often birds are coming down, finishing, basically their toes are going to be touching the water. Everybody pops up to shoot. and that dog is already halfway into the decoys and people are shooting right over that dog. Like, that is just not safe. And I don't care if that dog goes and picks up every bird that's there. I would rather that dog be steady and make my buddy go pick up those birds, because it is just, it's not safe. And I don't care, whose dog it is. There is not a bird on this planet that is worth a dog's safety. And so you might just hone in on a couple specific things and say, hey, I'm going to do this, and really focus on that. Again, your mindset has to change. You're probably not going to have the season you had first hoped for. But again, that's on you, right? Life got busy. Stuff got in the way. It's not the dog's fault. Mm-hmm. So let's change our mindset and let's go into this season and have a successful one with that mind change.
Now, you mentioned something as we're talking about the progression of water, the transition, I guess I should say, into, duck season. You mentioned, about some different products you use and the various ways that you use it. You mentioned a collar that you transitioned from, like a collar that you use during training versus a collar that when duck season starts, you're using a different sport dog collar. Can you kind of explain that scenario and why you switch those collars up?
Yeah, well, and so, so this is, I'd say, pretty specific to me. I wouldn't, preach that, everyone should necessarily do this. But so when I train all year long, I'm using the Sport Dog 25-25. And the reason I use that is that tube model, it's a big kind of tubular transmitter. It fits what I do really well. I can put it in my back pocket. I wear, certain kind of pants that have a side pocket. It fits in great. There's a lot of things I really like about that. It fits in my hand, but I can do a lot of cool things. Like with one hand, I can go low, medium, high. I get a couple extra levels. I love it for training, but there's no way that I would, lug that hammer around when I'm out hunting. Mm-hmm. So I transitioned to the 1825 is what I love when I'm out, or the 1825X rather, when I'm out hunting, because it's just more convenient for application in the field. It's a smaller transmitter. I don't need to have maybe all the features that I did in my training collar, because when I'm out hunting, my hope is that I've done the work during the summer up to this point that I don't have to use that collar very often. We hear all the time, from clients or at shows that, people are like, oh, man, like after the training was done, like I rarely ever had to use it, which is great. That's exactly why, you use it, is so you have that clear communication. The training is transitioned very smoothly, and you guys get on the same page. And so it's the 1825X, I think, for a hunting unit is great. Now it's a mile range, which I know for a lot of people, it's like, why would I ever need that? But I just always love to have the extra insurance. I would rather have way too much than not enough, for a situation.
One last question for you, and I think this is something that I picked up from your website, but and it'll be a good kind of introduction for someone who either has a dog or wanting to get a dog, or he maybe even has two dogs. But on your website, you kind of talk about how two dogs rarely respond to training methods the same way, and so you may have to take a different approach. But can you share some of examples of this, and how as a trainer you modify from one dog to the next with certain aspects of your training?
So I believe is my job as a professional trainer is no different than one of a school teacher, right? So I have my students just like they have theirs. And just like their students all have different strengths and weaknesses, and that teacher has to communicate with each of those kids differently to get the most out of them, so do I with these dogs. Now, there's a lot that goes into this, whether it's, breeding, temperament, drive, intelligence level, what have you. But I really believe we're seeing softer and softer dogs than we did years ago. And by soft, I don't mean bad. I just mean that if you look at the role of a dog in the house and a part of the family, that has changed over time. Like I remember my grandpa had a dog named Warden. He was a big chocolate lab. He had an outdoor kennel. And I remember as a kid, my grandpa telling me, you don't play with Warden. He's a hunting dog. You're going to screw him up if you play with him, and like now my grandpa's a dog that sleeps in bed with him at night, and so like that mind change. And, but that's also, so at the kennel, so we have 40 dogs at the kennel. not one of those dogs doesn't live in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at that and the role that that dog has as a part of the family, that dog, whether you hunt 6 days a year or 96 days a year, that dog is a family member first, our hunting dog second, right? So the temperaments, as breeders, shift for that, naturally change to a softer dog, because a softer dog isn't going to fight you every step of the way, isn't going to try to be dominant with you every day, every second, right? And so you're seeing a shift in the dogs. So what's happening is we're seeing that those old school tactics, like the, beat them overhead with a 2x4, type of situation, or like the heavy handed, on them, it doesn't work for these dogs. They're not that dog that's going to take that, push through it. So we have to, I believe, be even more talented as trainers and really get into each dog. You say, so, Bo here is very, very soft and submissive, and he needs a lot of encouragement, where the next dog, Hank, has a little more pop and drive and is going to push on us a little bit. And then the next dog, so you can see how with every dog, they might all be Labrador retrievers, but each of those dogs is an individual. And I just have way too much pride for the level that the dogs are at when they leave my facility to not reach the potential of every one of those dogs. And so we're constantly having to change our mindset not even every day, but each dog, so that we can get the most out of them for each training session. And so, it's, I would say for the guy at home that maybe has one dog, is getting another dog, you will likely see that, right? That, the second dog doesn't go through the training, in the manner that the first dog did. And so it's going to challenge you as an owner and as a handler and as a trainer yourself. But if you really step back and look at that as the fun that it could be, you're going to enjoy it. If you look at it as, this is a dog, it should just go through it, you're likely going to get frustrated, and there's going to be, a lot of hiccups there. But if you really step back and say, hey, this dog is a different dog, I need to change my approach, I think you'll really enjoy that process. It's something that I enjoy every single day.
No, that's great. And I think that's a good lesson for everyone to, you're honestly training to the temperament of the dog and being able to get more out of that dog because of that. And that also builds a much more solid relationship than, trying to force a dog to necessarily do something that, it's not going to do in a negative manner. You're probably spending more time on the encouragement side and really directing that dog to do what you want it to do through their temperament, which is a good lesson for everyone to remember.
Right. Well, and the other thing that I think, especially, let's go back to that situation where somebody has a dog getting another puppy and kind of going to go through the process again. The absolute best thing that you can do is do not compare this new puppy to your older dog, right? Because we have a way about us as humans is we kind of glorify the great times and we kind of suppress the bad times. And it's amazing how often people forget that older dog that is this finished dog I'm super proud of, like he was a puppy once too. And he went through all these struggles and all these peaks and valleys. And I mean, he went through all that stuff, right? But it's amazing. People come and pick up puppies, even if it's the second or third dog from us. And they're like, oh, my last dog, he's incredible. He's great. He's the best dog of our group, and blah, 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 blah. And all that stuff is great. And I let him go. And at the end of it, I'm like, that is awesome. I love that. But don't hold this puppy to that standard, because if you do, you're setting yourself up for frustration right off the bat. You really have to look at that puppy as an individual and really go down that road in a different manner, right? We want to make sure that we give this puppy the start that it needs so that he too can become that great dog. A lot of times you hear people say dog of a lifetime. I don't believe that. I believe that we have dogs inserted into our lives at different times that we need them. So like Easton for me, as we talked about early on in the show here, was the dog that got me into this. I mean, he literally changed the trajectory of my life, right? Like I would not have what I have today if it wasn't for that dog. And that's a pretty incredible thing. But he was a dog, like everybody tells me all the time, like he was your dog of a lifetime, right? Well, now I have Brock. Brock is that dog. Like I'd put him up against any dog you could find. I mean, he is a crazy, crazy level. He's everything that I want in a dog. And I love him to death. And, these companies, I have a couple companies that are doing these big features on him. Everybody adores him. Everybody loves him. And then everyone's like, well, he's your dog of a lifetime. Well, I would say they both are, but they're both inserted into my life at different times. Like Easton was in my life at the absolute time that I needed him, right? And he got me going. Brock was inserted into my life at the right time that I needed him, right? Like Brock pushed me to be not only a better trainer, but a better handler and really a more accomplished handler as well. But I don't know if I would have got out of Brock what I've gotten out of him if I had Brock when I had Easton, right? Because I didn't have the knowledge to get him there, where, you know, and vice versa. And so it's really interesting how they just become such a part of your life. Like you never replace them, right? It's just, you add to the family. It's a really, really special thing. There's no other bonds like this.
Yeah, it's great. And I can just tell how passionate you are about it. Just, you know, hearing you discuss the relationships with your dogs and, you know, different training methods. I know that it's, and that's one thing about dogs. That's one thing I'm sure our audience knows and those out there. I know guys who have duck dogs that are terrible duck dogs, but they still love that dog, you know, and,
right.
And so that's, you know, it is what it is. They are, you know, obviously considered man's best friend and definitely a duck hunter's or waterfowl hunter's best friend as well. Josh, man, this has been great. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, but we're going to have to get you back on at some point because we can go through, I think as through our conversation, we could go into deep dives into several different things that you talk about. But man, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
You bet, you guys. Yeah, anytime. I'd love to come back and talk with you guys. And if I don't talk to you before, have a great hunting season. And if anybody wants to keep up with what we have going on here at the kennel, you can follow us on Instagram. I do a lot of stories on our hunts, and just follow us at Riverstone Kennels.
Thanks a lot, man.
You bet, Chris.
Hey, I'd like to thank our guest, Josh Miller, the product training specialist for Sport Dog Brands and owner of Riverstone Kennels, for joining us today and enlightening us with all this great information on retrievers and retriever training. I'd like to thank our podcast producer, Clay Baird, for doing a fantastic job getting the show out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the podcast, but also supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.